But we're delighted, Buddy, that you have put together this new book. It's gorgeous to look at and so many new things in it. And that's what he's going to talk about this afternoon. So please welcome Buddy Sullivan.
It's nice. It's just barely room for the speaker. Tell you what, this is like, what is it, sardines? Oh my goodness. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate this very much. This is a wonderful turnout, so many familiar faces, and that really means a lot to me. We all.
It's going to take a minute to.
The idea of this is to present a new book. Oh.
Let's turn those out. If you want them off right now, somebody here, Sapelo. That's the one.
The pictures will look better if the lights are off.
And if you want to.
Turn out, but there's okay.
And what about this?
Yeah, this one.
This one, whatever you want. Which one is it?
It's the left one. This, that's off to Harry. It got to see, they can unmute to it.
Yes, certainly.
Harry, trouble with the clicker.
No, Benny.
He pulled Harry, and I'm very on with that. So it's like, you know. But anyway, we're here to unveil a new book, and it's not just my book, it's the people of this county's book, and that's the way I've always looked at it. So it's a compilation of a lot of material. How many of you, just a show of hands, have the original early days? Okay, well, it's not too many. It's not too many. Well, if you have the original early days, they were printed in the 1990s, pretty good while ago. That book is still very useful. There's a lot of good information in it, but also this new book, the new edition, will have a lot more in it. I mean, it's got, on my computer, the original edition is like 350,000 words. This new edition is almost 600,000 words. So that tells you that this is quite a bit more material that's in this new volume. And Harriet suggested that what I do, rather than give you an overview of the history of this county, which some of you probably know more about than I do, but I'm going to show you some images and talk to you about some of the material in the book, maybe do a couple of readings, and also just kind of give you a little flavor of what's inside the book, and those of you who wish to buy a book can get a little preview of the book and what's in it. This book is really a lot about place. It's about place because we are in a special place, have been for thousands of years, and we've always known it. And it's one of those kind of things that we don't take for granted at all. I know few people of coastal Georgia who take our coast for granted. For the ecosystem, the environment, of course, the culture and the history, it's all very special. And I start my book off in the introduction, and those of you that get the book will see this. I start off just with a paragraph talking about place in the context of it. The sense of place has always been fundamental to an understanding of the southern native psyche. In no other region of America have the people attached themselves to their land and their landscape with quite the depth of passion, perception, and permanence, particularly in the generations preceding our modern America. For Southerners, it is the land that conjures and denotes an essentiality of place. For Southerners, it is the clearest embodiment of permanence. Scholars have long argued over this notion, but when viewed from the perspective of 3 centuries, the concept of property and property ownership clearly devolves from people's association with the land and the soil, be they planter, sharecropper, slave, or freedman. Margaret Mitchell understood it best in Gone with the Wind when she rescues a hungry Scarlett O'Hara from the flames of Atlanta to return to her home, to her familial lands at Tara. Quoting, she sat down in the furrows and dug into the earth with hands that shook, filling her basket slowly. As God is my witness, I'm never going to be hungry again. That's the essentiality of land and permanence and place. All of the photographs I'm showing to you are in the book, this new edition of the book. So, and they're in color. There's a lot of these color pictures. All of these pictures I'm showing you will be in this book. So that'll kind of give you a little, there's a lot of historic images, but also there are images of what we look like. In fact, this picture here is on the first page of the book. Because that's place. That's McIntosh County. He knows where that is. Not you, Suzanne. You don't count.
Welcome to me. It's like our dog.
Shall I hear dog? That's the old Darien shrimp docks, what's left of them on that part of it, and looking over toward Crate. And this is where I live. This is the backside of Cedar Point, looking toward Basden's Bluff. It's sunset. Didn't know I was a photographer too, did you? With a cell phone, we can all take these pictures. We're all good photographers with a cell phone, aren't we? Everybody can get pictures this good. This is the old rice mill at Butler Island. This picture looks fairly recent, but actually it was taken in the 1930s by a photographer named Orange Sage Whiteman. Orange Sage Whiteman was a physician from up north, and he came down to coastal Georgia in the 1930s and took a whole series of pictures about the coast, largely in Glenn and McIntosh and Liberty counties. And so this is the old part of the old mill at Butler Island, not the stack, but this is part of the mill apparatus at Butler Island, most of which is not there. But I think this is a very interesting picture because it gives you an idea of this part of Butler Island almost 100 years ago. And of course, Pierce and Fanny Kimball Butler are the people most associated with Butler Island because of Fanny Kimball's famous journal that she wrote is a description of her time in coastal Georgia, the time that she spent with her husband, Pierce M. Butler, on the left there. And she was very opposed, of course, to slavery. She was anti-slavery, a very virulent anti-abolitionist. She actually, nobody's really quite understood it. She was from England, an actress, a Shakespearean actress. Her family was abolitionist, very strong abolitionist. She married the largest slave owner of Georgia. That was polar opposites, you would think. But nonetheless, they married. They had two lovely daughters, Sarah and Frances. But of course, her writings about her opposition to slavery and the conditions she encountered at Butler's Island, which were not very good, and her husband was very upset at her. So of course, they ended up splitting up and divorcing after about 15 years of marriage. And this rare, very rare photograph, which is in the book, shows them near the end of their marriage. And of course, they don't look very happy, do they? You know they're not getting along just by the expressions on their faces. We've had a lot of information and a lot of programming and books have been written about the weeping time, and that's an important time in the history of our county. The largest slave auction, a huge slave auction in Savannah of the Butler slaves in 1859. And so Pierce Butler had gotten heavily into debt. He was hard to figure since he was one of the most productive rice planters in all of the Southeast. But he got in debt and he had to sell off over 400 slaves at the Savannah auction, and it was called the weeping time because it broke up families. Families were split apart by the auction of the slaves. And so I cover this with some detailed information and some new information pertaining to the weeping time here in the area. This is Aunt Jane Lewis, born a slave, lived well into the 20th century. In fact, she lived until 1946, well over 100 years old, of Darien. Quite a woman. She was a very interesting person, and she is long remembered by longtime residents of the county that were alive at that time. And my parents and my grandparents knew Aunt Jane Lewis and what an interesting person she was, as was Liverpool Hazard, also born a slave, Butler Island. He was a young man when the Civil War broke out, and then he got his freedom, of course, emancipated as a young man, and lived around Darien for the rest of his life, and was very well known. Very smart, very well educated man. This is Charles Colcott Jones, Reverend Dr. Charles C. Jones, a Presbyterian minister, who I have in this new book I've really gotten interested in. He's quite an interesting man, a planter from Liberty County, Lower Liberty County. He was a Presbyterian minister, and he was also a slave owner. And it was somewhat paradoxical for Jones. He was torn between owning slaves, but also knowing that it was wrong to do so. And as were many of his contemporaries. And he started an organization to teach religion in the Bible and the worship to the slaves of this part of coastal Georgia. And of course, he and his family, the Jones family of Liberty County, were prolific letter writers. Harriet and I were talking a while ago. Back in those days, everybody wrote a lot of letters, and we didn't have the cell phones and email. So you wrote letters. Almost daily basis, you wrote somebody a letter or received a letter from somebody. This is how people communicated. And the Jones family did a lot of that. And so some of you may be familiar with the book, The Children of Pride, which is a compendium of all of the letters of the Jones family and their allied families during this period of time, and before, during, and after the Civil War. But he's an interesting man, and he's something worthy of the further study, and I've always been fascinated by him. But anyway, his pictures, first time I've ever used his picture in one of my books, and I've stumbled on it on the internet, and it turned out to be a very good picture, very contemporary picture of him in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. Wow. Darien was burned in the Civil War, and it was, of course, we are familiar with that story, burning of Darien by federal troops. But it rebuilt because of the lumber industry, quick to rebuild. Started to just, sawmills, lumber yards, boat yards. Shipping came into the harbor. So this is a sketch of Darien, about 1880 or so, a drawing by a visitor who pictured Darien. This is the old Magnolia House Hotel there in the middle of the picture. I think this building is supposed to represent the Strain building. And there's the Strain building, about 1910 or 20, somewhere along in there. You can date the car better than I can. But that's the two-story Strain building, and on the left here is the what used to be the Darien Bank. And it was started in 1889, and the building was built next door to the Strain building. This is supposedly the oldest commercial building in Darien, still standing. It was burned in the Civil War during the federal raid, but the walls remained standing. So it did not completely get destroyed, and it was refurbished and rebuilt after the war and served as a general store, ship chandlery, that sort of thing, hardware store for Mr. Strain, who bought the property and owned it, and then his sons also managed it for a long time. But I love these old photographs that show just kind of the way things were. And there seems to be a lot more greenery on Broad Street there than sometimes we see now. And just looking at the photographs and the overhanging of the trees over the street. This is what I mean by place. This is place. This is our place. This is where we are. The salt marsh ecosystem, so unique. There's a lot of African American history in this book, more so than in my other books, because I feel like this is an area of our county and our part of coastal Georgia that probably needs a lot more study and attention. There have been some excellent books written about African Americans in this county, but there needs to be more work on this by scholars and academics and people who know how to really get into the old records, the old plantation accounts and accounts of post the Civil War. But have always thought that this county is unique because of Sapelo and the Geechee community on Sapelo, which is one of the most unique in anywhere in the southeastern United States. And this is one of the people of Sapelo. I'll take him in the 1930s. This is Eddie Hall on his ox cart, taken about 1938 by one of my mentors, Malcolm Bell. Malcolm and his wife, Muriel, from Savannah, they were historians and were involved in the Savannah Writers Project that produced the book Drums and Shadows, which many of you are probably familiar. And so these pictures appeared in Drums and Shadows. But anyway, the originals of these pictures were inherited by the Bell's son, Mac Bell III, and he was generous enough to me to supply high-resolution images of the pictures his parents took and gave me permission to reproduce them in my book. They're quite unique. This is a picture about 1930 or so. This picture was taken by Lydia Parrish. Lydia Parrish was a historian and also a music and cultural scholar from St. Simon's. And she was a good friend of Howard Coffin, and she came to Sapelo around 1930-31 before he sold the island to Reynolds. And so she took a lot of pictures of the Geechee community. And at that time, there were a lot of communities on Sapelo. There were about 8 or 10 different African-American communities on the island. So Miss Parrish went all around. She had somebody drive her around to all of these communities. And so this is one of the neatest pictures that she took. Shy children. She's too shy to look right into the camera. It just tells you a lot. It's really a unique photograph. Sargey Rounds and his cursed wife, Elizabeth Dillard Rounds, with two of their first two children. This picture was made about 1940 or so. Of course, by then, Reynolds had bought Sapelo. He was from North Carolina. And he never lived full time on Sapelo, but he spent a good deal of time on the island. Is sort of a retreat, a getaway. His greatest legacy to our area is the Marine Institute. He invited scientists to come to Sapelo and awarded buildings and areas of research to the University of Georgia Marine Biology Department. And this was in 1953. So that's where they started the Marine Institute. These were some of the earliest scientists. And the gentleman here, the second from the right, is Eugene Odom. He's one of the most prominent ecologists, ecological scientists that ever came along. Quite an interesting man, and he was one of the founders who established the Marine Institute on Sapelo. I show this slide and talk about this because a good deal of my new book involves the connection of the ecosystem with our history. And a lot of the connection of the ecosystem with history involves science and environmental conservation. So I get into a good bit of the book is related. I call it a subtext of the history part of the book, because throughout the book you'll see threads of this story of how science and what the scientists at Sapelo and other places have learned, and how it connects our history, and how important the ecosystem has been to the history of peoples who have lived here. And that's Dr. Odom in later life, and he made so many contributions. He's known as the father of modern ecology. He was very, very prominent. Started at the University of Georgia as a young biologist in the early 1940s, and became extremely popular and well known internationally for his work, his research, his writings, his scholarly papers about the ecosystem. He and some of his colleagues were the first people to make the connection between the salt marsh and the seafood industry, and the importance of the marshes to the seafood industry because of the nutritional benefits of decaying salt marsh, which shellfish, of course, use to live. It's their way they eat it and survive and grow and develop. And they also established the life cycle of the shrimp. Over years of research in the 50s and 60s, they realized that shrimp spawn in the open sea and migrate inshore to the sounds of the creeks and the rivers to grow and develop. While they're here, They're feeding off the decaying salt marsh, Spartina. And then they grow to maturity and migrate back out to sea, and the cycle starts all over again. And up until the early 50s, nobody understood this. But the science has come through, and I get into this in the book quite a bit. I think this is really, as I say, an important subtext. If you're interested in lighthouses, there will be a good bit of lighthouse history in the book related to Sapelo and Wolf Island. This is Sapelo right after the hurricane of 1898, which destroyed the keeper's house, which would be behind the lighthouse. And they were in the process, when this picture was taken, of building a new lighthouse, a steel lighthouse nearby. This is Wolf Island, taken before the Civil War. It's a beacon, it's a range beacon, it's not technically a lighthouse. Rare picture, I found that through my research in the National Archives. Some very nice people work at the National Archives. And you don't have to pay them anything. That's their job. It's to help people do research. And so a nice man several years ago dug up these pictures for me, particularly Wolf Island, which I'd never seen. Nobody knew a picture of the Wolf Island Lighthouse existed. And years ago, when I was doing the research for the first edition of the book, he sent me Xeroxes of these, and I said, and then he said, "Would you like me to make you prints?" Glossy prints, and I said, "Oh yeah." This is your taxpayer dollars at work in a good way. I'll never forget that experience. It's just incredible. I like sunsets over the marsh. There's cemetery history because the cemeteries, in their own sort of way, tell the story of the people who live here, the many, many generations of people. This is St. Andrews, an old photograph of St. Andrews years and years ago. But I have found just by walking the cemeteries, many in this county, and I've been to just about every one of the cemeteries in this county, and just you can learn so much history just reading headstones. Maybe a little bit about a person who is buried there, or the sort of person they were, or their attributes, or when they were born, when they died, maybe something about their family. So cemeteries are important, and so I have not neglected that coverage in this book at all. In fact, there's a separate chapter about all of the main cemeteries in the county. St. Andrews, of course, being probably the most best known and prominent, but there are major cemeteries at Upper Middle in Darien, and at Ebenezer, just up Highway 17 between Darien and Eulonia. Holland Cemetery in the southwest part of the county. The Davis Cemetery up on the north end of the county. And so they're just cemeteries all over the county, family cemeteries, and then some are public burial grounds, such as St. Andrews. One of the most interesting cemeteries that I have found is the Goulds Cemetery at Harris Neck, at Goulds Landing, on what is now the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Refuge at Harris Neck. But the Goulds Cemetery was developed after the Civil War, and so many of the people buried in that cemetery are descendants of the slaves of Harris Neck, going way back to their forebears to the early 1800s. This is Hazard's ballast pile, Hazard's hammock, some people call it, as you're looking toward the east over Sapelo Sound. This area has always fascinated me, and as a child, with my friends, Johnny Ream and Quism Forsyth, and the people I ran the roads with and grew up with, we spent a lot of time at Hazard's, fishing and crabbing, and also hunting for bottles among the ballast rock that you could see scattered along the shore. And so this is an important place. But in the late early 1900s, this is where timber ships came in to load lumber that was rafted up from the sawmills at Darien and towed up there. They liked Sapelo Sound because it was a deeper harbor. The big ships could get in there, which kept getting bigger in size and tonnage, so they developed Sapelo Sound as a loading ground, as well as the Blackbeard Quarantine, which is a good bit of information about Blackbeard as well. really haven't mentioned Blackbeard much today, but there is a lot of Blackbeard history. It's one of the most interesting islands on the coast that very few people know much about. So I really had to do a lot of digging. But Blackbeard was a live oak timber reserve. The U.S. government, the Navy Department, cut oak timber on Blackbeard to build warships with in the early 1800s. And we have a lot of documentation about that, which I relate in the book. And then later, of course, it was the U.S. quarantine station for the South Atlantic coast, which is a big deal. Ships had to check in at Blackbeard. This was in the days when yellow fever was prolific. Had terrible epidemics at Savannah, for example, in 1876, in Brunswick the same year. So the ships came into Blackbeard to be inspected, and if they were found to have any kind of disease, such as malaria, yellow fever, or whatever, they were put into quarantine till the disease passed. Blackbeard is now a federal property. It's a wildlife refuge. Nobody lives there now. It used to have a caretaker, but as far as I know, they don't have one now. You'll find in this book a lot of maritime history, and a lot of you know how interested I am in the history of boats and watercraft and shipping, as well as our fishing industry. And I think that's important to carry that on. This is a picture of some of the shrimp boats at Valona on Shell Bluff Creek, but I think that's important, and I'll read you a little snippet of something I wrote about the importance of the maritime and boats and watercraft our area. Those who lived in the Georgia Lowcountry during the late 19th and early 20th centuries passed along to later generations their memories of the constant presence of boats in their lives, directly or indirectly. Watercraft of all descriptions abounded on the local tidal streams. Like their awareness of place and permanence on dry ground, there was always the intuitive sense of native coastal Georgians to their natural connection to the sea. I have lifelong memories of regular exposure to local shrimp boats and of messing about in the ubiquitous oyster bateau as a kid, and then later in fancier, faster craft around Cedar Point and Valona in the county. Historian William C. Fleetwood makes an insightful observation regarding the waterways in the prologue to his book, Tidecraft. Quote, "To tell the story of this region, it is necessary to tell of boats. Not necessarily fancy or large craft, just plain get from here to there boats that could live with the mud and the oyster rakes, the narrow creeks, and the short, choppy seas of the sounds, and would be simple and cheap to build and operate." End quote. So these words apply to almost every aspect of the history of the coastal Lowcountry, from the Sea Islands of South Carolina and Georgia to Northeast Florida. To know the history of the Georgia Tidewater, one must possess at least an elemental understanding of the unique relationship that has existed for more than 300 years between the people of the coast and the sea. Was the Cedar Point Oyster Cannery in the late 1930s, operated by the Atwood family, Henry Atwood. I get into a lot of detail in this new book about how these boats, the oyster boats, the shrimp boats, were constructed in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, because this was the peak time of the seafood industry in coastal Georgia. You know, things changed in the 70s and in the 80s for a number of factors, but this period of the 50s and 60s, early 70s were really the peak period of our local commercial seafood industry, particularly shrimp. This is the school group of people at Valona, about 1920 or so. I don't know, it's in the book, I forget the exact date. But these are children and their teachers at the Valona school. And I won't try to name all these, what's his name? But they're in the caption, they're all identified. But I thought this was a great example of the so-called atypical one-room schoolhouse, because I do get into the educational history of the county to a pretty good degree in the book, but this photograph sort of tells that story. But there are Durants there, and there are Burris there, and there are, they're just a compendium of early families of Valona whose descendants still live at Valona. So I think this is a very unique picture. More of our place and permanence. This is the northeast tip of Creighton Island. I love to get out in the boat and go to these remote places, these places where there's nobody around, no boats, no houses, no nothing. And so this is the northeast tip of Creighton, looking in the distance toward Harris Neck, or maybe Sutherland's Bluff. The conservation movement is important. We all understand the conservation of the coast and how unique it is and how important it is to the coast. I devote a pretty good bit of attention to this because it involves not just McIntosh County and Sapelo, but also the whole Georgia coast. So based on the research at Sapelo in the 50s and 60s, there became to a realization that, in order to conserve the marsh systems, the ecosystem on the salt marshes, which by then had been determined to be critical to the commercial seafood industry, it became imperative to protect the marshes. And so various movements began on the coast by legislators and scientists and education people, private citizens, to let's get some legislation together and protect the marshes. And so this is Reed Harris there in the middle there. Reed Harris was the Glenn County representative in the Georgia General Assembly, and he introduced the bill to protect the salt marshes called the Coastal Marshlands Protection Act in 1970. And this is one of the most significant pieces of legislation that you'll ever find as far as protecting our ecosystem, what we have now. And so it was the Harris bill that paved the way, and it was overwhelmingly approved. And then, of course, that led to other legislation to protect the marshes. But it was Reed Harris who really pushed this. And he's hardly known. He's very little known in Georgia history. But those on the coast who understand science and ecology and conservation certainly know who Reed Harris was. Another family that's very prominent in conservation is the Jones family of Sea Island. Here you see 3 generations of the Jones family. Alfred Sr. on the left, and his son, Alfred Jr., and then Alfred III, Bill Jones, in the middle. Bill is a good friend of mine. I've known Bill for years and years, and he's also been great help to me. But the grandfather, Alfred Sr., was a very strong conservationist. He believed in protecting the ecosystem. He was into tourism and that sort of thing, and involved with Sea Island and the cloister and whatnot. But he also understood the importance of preserving the ecosystem. So he acquired a lot of land. He acquired the land at Cannon's Point that eventually became part of the St. Simon's Land Trust, which is protected and preserved and now for the public to enjoy. So the Jones family made a large contribution. I also mentioned Bill III because Bill has always been generous in helping me with my books. He's the one that the photographs that you'll see in the book, most of the black and white pictures in the book of Sapelo and other parts of the coast came from his grandfather's collection, and Bill has always provided them to me to use in the book. And so he's been an immeasurable help to me over the years with my photographic collections and research. It's Sandy West. We all know who Sandy West is, right? Eleanor Torrey West of Ossabal in late life. Sandy West was another one of those who really got on board with the conservation movement in the 1960s and 70s. And of course, she was descended from the Torrey family that owned Ossabal from the early 1900s. And she was the last full-time resident of Ossabal. She sold the island to the state of Georgia in 1978 with the understanding that she would be allowed to continue to live in her parents' house there over the north end of Ossabal. And she lived there until she was 103. Or she had help, caretakers and all that, but her health got so bad. So she finally passed away at the ripe old age of 108. And it's just a remarkable lady. And when I worked at Sapelo, I had the opportunity, the very fortunate opportunity, to go to Ossabaw several times and visit with her. And she and I introduced ourselves to the internet together. She was learning email, and according to her, the first email she successfully sent came to me at Sapelo. And she said, "Did you get this? And let me know, write me back." And so I wrote her back. And this was like in the 90s, mid-90s somewhere. And so she was learning how to do emails, and I was too. It was all new to us at that time. And so she was, but she was trendy. She was on top of everything. I mean, she was a Spitfire. She loved the coast, she loved Ossabaw, and she stood up for it very, very much. This is Ophelia Dent, as a young woman of Hawthorne Plantation. She and, as Harry had alluded to, William Bill Haynes were close friends and colleagues, and they were very big in the preservation of the Altamaha River. And so Ophelia had the Hawthorne Plantation, and of course Bill here at the Ashantilly Press, and they were very involved in the protection of the Altamaha ecosystem, the lower Altamaha River. Bill founded the Historical Society in Darien, and Ophelia, upon her death in 1973, willed the Hawthorne Tract to the state of Georgia as a state historic site for education. So Ophelia Dent has made a real significant imprint on our coastal history and our conservation movement. Just a few little random photographs. This is the hotel at Pine Harbor, about 1915. You know, they had a hotel, a 3-story hotel at Pine Harbor, developed by the Fairhope Land Company. In order they were trying to lure people to come to Pine Harbor and buy lots and start seasonal vacation homes, stay in the hotel and enjoy the amenities of the nearby Sapelo River. So this is a very rare picture of that. I have not neglected the western part of the county. I haven't mentioned too much about it, but this is the old Davis Thorpe store at Townsend. E.M. Thorpe was one of the most prominent people in the county for many, many years in the late well into the 1900s, up through the 50s. But he and his father-in-law started this store, built this brick store in Townsend, which was then a pretty thriving railroad center through the western part of the county. But I have the picture in the book of the original store as it looked, and then this picture that I took several years ago just to remind us that store is still there. But I do get into places like Warsaw, which is no longer existent, and the sawmill there, and Jones and Cox, which was a naval store center, and as was Townsend, and Warsaw with the lumber mill there. This was in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. So much activity, all based on the railroad going through that part of the county. So we get into that in a pretty big way. Some of it's quite detailed, as well as a lot of the families associated with that part of the county. This is Fort Stewart. I get into there's a segment near the very end of the book that I devote to what was then known as Camp Stewart, which was begun in 1940 on condemned land in several counties, in Liberty, Bryan, Long, and Evans, and Tatnall, in which the U.S. War Department began to develop a training base. And so you say, why Camp Stewart? Well, it had a huge impact on McIntosh County because so many McIntosh counties either served in the Army at Fort Stewart or worked as employees, civilian employees at Fort Stewart, and still do. So this is important. I felt like it deserved some coverage in the book for the impact. And it's not that far to you. It's just as the crow flies, maybe 25 miles up at Hinesville for the main part. So that's important too. But I came across this old postcard view. This is probably sometime during or just after World War II. So I thought this would be a nice little addition. Well, part of the book is some of you may surmise I'm a big believer in where I grew up, and this is important to me. And I have devoted several pages in the end of the book discussing my feelings about, getting sand between my shoes and my toes and mud between my toes and growing up and fishing and enjoying all this and, becoming aware of the ecosystem at a very early age. and smelling the salt air and knowing that this is indeed special. I have memories of my father at Cedar Point teaching me how to tie my shoes at the age of 5 and looking across the marsh toward Creighton Island. And I said, Daddy, that looks like a train. And he says, yeah, it looks like a train going down the tracks because of the way Creighton was formed. And so these are just so many memories that I've had and have enjoyed. And I think that's important for us to remember, where we began, where we came from. 4 generations of my family have lived at Cedar Point and have been involved in this county, 5 counting my children. So it's important to me to remember this, and also where we are and where we've been and what it still is. It's special. It's a special place. It's 796 pages long. I won't challenge you to read the book from cover to cover. 709, you'll probably get bored by page 6. This book is really not meant to be read from cover to cover. It's meant to be the kind of book you flip through and go to one section or another. It's very comprehensively indexed, so look up something in the index and then go to that section or that page where that's mentioned or discussed. You can skip around in there and really not miss anything. And it's also a valuable reference for those of you that are into genealogy and the economic history of the county and that sort of thing. So, and it covers so many, as I've said, so many different topics. So I think you will, as I said at the very end of the introduction, I think the last line of the introduction says, having said all of this as preamble, which I've done now, I hope you enjoy this new edition of Early Days. Oh, who is that? White Rose Cottage is my uncle and my father's shrimp boat. Right after World War II, Howard Owen Hunter and his brother-in-law, my dad, Earl Sullivan, went into the seafood business at Cedar Point and operated the cannery there. And they ran a shrimp boat called the White Rose. And I've got pictures of the White Rose in my book. When I built my little house at Cedar Point 6 or 8 years ago, my good friend Jim Pupil, who designed my house, said, you need to name this White Rose Cottage, because he knew about my background with the White Rose. And so I had that sign made. This is how nice people are. A nice man that makes signs in Savannah. I took the idea of what I wanted for that sign and asked him to make it. And I figured it'd be $500 to $600. He wouldn't take a cent for making me that sign. And I know it's a $500 sign. But he said, I just love this coast so much that you're gonna end up there for good. And I said, yep, I'm not going anywhere. I started there and I'm gonna end there. So he said, well, this sign's free. Just take a picture of it and send it to me, which I of course did. And there you see the front cover and the back cover and the spine. Just as a little preview. Okay. Questions, comments?
What was the man's name who made the sign?
Anna, I can't tell you. I could go back and dig in my files and kind of read pieces around. It's actually cool.
Alan Topton and Brenda Topton, newcomers. They bought the old Herb Davis place and are redoing it.
Okay.
And a man owned it that did signs it's about and made them a sign.
Well, that may be the same. I bet it's the same one. I can't remember his name. He's such a nice man. But he said he had a connection to the county. Yeah. But,
Place there.
yeah. Okay. I'm just interested. Yeah.
Buddy, your new book, does it have everything the old book has in?
Yeah, it does.
Everything
It has everything in it. Some of it's a little bit abridged. It has the list of names of people are in there. The list of people like the land grants from the colonial era, things like that. That's still in the new book. All of that material, and the book is in there. It's just arranged and organized differently. This is for example, the old book has the county's history very narrative. In the new book, I take, for example, a place like Harris Neck and put the whole story of Harris Neck in one chapter to kind of keep it, or Western McIntosh County in one chapter. to keep it all kind of like consolidated by subject or topic. But the rest of it kind of flows along. But yeah, it's everything's in the old book, but you'll find in the new book. That's why there's so many more words, because the old book's there, but then there's another 200,000 or 300,000 words of new stuff. So there you go.
Thank you, but there one more from Diane.
Oh,
You've mentioned you said it's not a lighthouse that was on Wolf Island. What was
it was a range beacon.
a range beacon?
Yeah, it's not. Oh, most lighthouses is at the entrance to a sound or a harbor. There'd be a lighthouse, but there'd also be a ranging beacon for ship pilots and navigators to get their fixes on a lighthouse and a range beacon on the other side of the sound, for example. And it was all related to navigation and how it could look at its chart. Here's a shoal or a sandbar. Here's the Wolf Island beacon. There's the Sapelo Light, which there was also a beacon there. And he could triangulate and chart his course into the harbor.
Thank you.
Yep.
When did you start researching and writing about the area here? You know, what inspired?
Oh, probably when I was about 10. No, I'm just kidding. That's a good question. In part of the introduction to the book, it's into my interest in maps. And you'll find in this book a huge number of maps and charts and sections of maps and charts. And I started that at a very early age as a child. And then that sort of spilled over into the historical interest. In my family, I come from a family of people who've just been fascinated by history. Right on down through my great-great-grandparents from this area. They just passed on the interest in history right down the line. My children had it from me now, for example, so.
It was Bessie.
And cool, oh yeah, Miss Bessie Lewis. Bessie Lewis was the county historian for 50-odd years. She came here as a young woman in the early 1900s, and she was the county historian. And you know, we really owe a lot to Bessie Lewis because she did the early digging, particularly about the Scottish Highlanders in Fort King George. She really uncovered a lot of material that nobody knew about. So she has made us later historians our job much, much easier. But she was my first mentor. When I was about 12 years old, Miss Bessie, she knew I was interested in history, and she had just completed her writing and the installation of a lot of these historic markers around the county. So she took me around. We spent all day on a Saturday going to every single marker in the county, 30-something of them, from one end of the county to the other, Harris Neck to Butler Island. And she has shared all of these stories about all these places, and I was hooked then. After that day, I'll never forget that day. It was easy to get hooked. So the serious recall, I came home, we all go away but come back home eventually. And I came back as editor of the Darien News in the late 80s. And that's when I started really getting into the history, doing the research. And my employers, Mr. and Mrs. Charles Williams, were extremely supportive of that. They enabled me to take time and go research in the archives, St. Simon's, for example, or Brunswick Library, or wherever. And of course, my first edition of the book was printed by the Darien News. They have a printing office there, and still do. So that's where it really got going. And as time went on, I continued to do research and write and put stuff out and little things together. The Legree Journal, for example, and the Rice Journal, John Legree of Darien, the post-Civil War journal. The Mary Sue Rogers Murray got me onto that and gave me permission to edit that journal, which turned out to be one of the most fascinating documents that I've ever run across. Mr. Legree, who lived at Ashantilly and kept a journal of his daily life and the historical associations around here and things like the earthquake of 1886 and the hurricanes of the 1890s. And so that really got me going too. That came out after the first edition of early days. And so I have included snippets from the journal in the new book, as well as the journal of Archibald McKinley from Sapelo Island. It's a Lion McKinley journal in the Sapelo book, which I've done a second book on as well. I inscribed a lot of those interesting entries into the new book just to kind of give it some added depth and sections. So it's a long story. I'm older than I look, I'll tell you like that. Just kidding.
Thanks for spending time on.
Get a lot of kind. A lot of water out of this Darien Bridge.
Did you start with typewriter?
Oh, good point, Suzanne. Yeah. The first book, the first early days book, a couple of you brought them in here today, was done on a Smith Ron portable manual typewriter. And I'm a hunting pendant. And you talked about a tedious job. And of course, I'm fanatic about detail. And so when you're trying to take pages of type, and then, oh, I've got to get this in somehow. So I had to do a lot of retyping. So that was about an 8-year job on that first early days book because of that. And I said, I'll never do another book. But by the time the first book came out, then here we come with word processors. And that saved the days.
And his notes and his indices are fabulous. That they are so much to the books.
I find that people like footnotes. The people who are serious about history like footnotes. So you'll find something over 2,000 footnotes in this new edition. And the notes not only provide source citations, but also additional little information relevant to what I'm talking about that may not really be that important to put into the main text. But I threw it in there because people have told me they find so much good stuff in footnotes, not just my stuff, but everybody. And then, as you said, the index is very comprehensive. I think the index is about 20 pages long and 10-point type. So the index is a real good tool to look things up. Yep, good.
Was Maddie Gladstone known to be a source of local history?
Oh yes, Maddie was there. Her and Annie Gill. Maddie Gladstone was very, very, very knowledgeable about. She helped me out a lot. She shared a lot of her material, particularly her McIntosh family genealogy, which she's a McIntosh descendant, of course, and she helped me out a lot. And then, of course, it was Maddie who compiled the cemetery register for the county, which is an extremely important reference book. It's a little dated now. It came out about 20 years ago, but at the time it was published, she and Suzanne and some of the others who got in on that effort, complete collection on the cemetery, every cemetery in the county, every gravestone marking. It was an incredible, and still is an incredible research tool that I have cited frequently in this new book.
Is it in the library?
Yeah, it's in the Otta Hilton Library. Yep. And I think it's still.
Well, no, yes and no. It was. We have a couple of volumes that were in our library here, and then Lower Altamaha Historical Society (LAHS) would sell them too, and then all of a sudden, we all realized that we had very few copies left, and they were spiral bound, and I still don't know exactly where
You know something, somebody still pranks that.
Well, no, and I don't know where good actual masters.
I think it's in Brunswick at what's the printing place?
Glover.
Lovers. The Lovers did the original, didn't they?
Well, we need to get in touch with it because we don't have any to sell. I always will.
Well, the spiral bound ones, I always thought the spiral bound ones were done by Glover too, but maybe not.
I don't know. I didn't recall like this.
In Glover, maybe as that would be in business.
It's arrow for you now.
Yeah, it's really an important book.
I have sort of a big question. I apologize in advance, but I'm curious for your perspective on the growth of McIntosh moving forward and how we kind of balance that idea of growth with the idea of preserving that census of space.
Yeah, that is a big question. It is a big question, and there are a lot of opinions on that question.
Yes.
It's the same question.
McIntosh, probably, technically it's Madnish. If you're a Scotsman, you're going to say Matnish. Of course, we all say McIntosh because we don't know the dialect properly, but the county has been the last part of the Georgia coast to really be, discovered for development, for tourism, for everything. I mean, look at Darien. I mean, look how long it's taken Darien to get going. So with the sudden spurt in growth, I'd say in probably the last 20 odd years, well, the 90s saw a lot of people move in, particularly in the north end of the county. to have seasonal homes or retirement homes. So the north end of the county around Sheldon Bluff and Belvedere Island, those areas, Harris Neck, really began to grow with residential development. But now you're starting to see growth in other parts of the county. And I'm not going to say that it's always managed very well. It's a very delicate situation because of the environment of this area. And so many people are so protective of the environment around here with the live oak trees and the marshes and the waterways. And then there are others that looking at development, and they I get into this in the book a little bit, the conservationists versus the developers, that sort of thing. It's a thorny question. But my hope and my aim is, long after I'm gone from here, is that, you know, the county will continue to at least keep that in mind and do slow, maybe steady growth, but careful growth. That's the key. You know, I don't think McIntosh County's ready for Target and Walmart and all of this sort of thing. We got a very nice golf course in the county. The golf course is wonderful. It's up near Sheldon. That's a wonderful asset to the county, which we need. And things like that are great. But we don't want to become over commercialized. And I work hard.
It's going to be very hard.
Yeah. And we've got light industry here, which is good. And the industrial park has been getting some. Thomas Straffen, who's the industrial park director, has done some great work, and his team of his committee have done some good work in getting the kind of businesses and industries in the industrial park that we want there. You know, not going to put out a bunch of smog and stuff like that, so pollutants, whatever. So it's something to watch and keep an eye on. And we do have some people here in the county who are very watchful of it. Once in a while, you'll see somebody pop up in the Darien News with a letter that said, "Going too fast, slow down."
It's going to be a tough road.
Yeah.
I have a short.
That's a good question. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going yesterday to Sheldon Bluff and going all Green Island and noticed several rock piles. Are all those rock piles ballast stones? No any natural stone here.
And all came from Europe. Came from Germany and Scandinavia, Great Britain. Of course, the ships would come over, particularly the wooden ships. The wooden ships would come over and dump the ballast in the marsh and then load with lumber and go back across the ocean. Of course, they had to have the ballast, you know, for stability, you know, so they wouldn't capsize. But yeah, all that rock you see, and there's not nearly as much as it used to be. You go all over the coast and see flagstone walks made with ballast rock. And I get crazed when I see that, but what do you do? You know what I mean? But there's still a lot of it around this county. In fact, around Doughboy and around Crate, Front River, up around Darien, some of those areas, you'll see ballast.
We could do this all
I've
over.
already question.
You've got to stop historic and cemeteries.
Yeah.
I helped build the mall out there. And they took hands, earth movers that move the dirt and cover and so many graves.
Yeah.
And
I heard about that.
And it was no tell. Don't tell anybody go over doing it. You know? And it was hundreds of graves.
Yeah, that was a slave cemetery.
Yeah.
It where they put the outlet mall.
Where's that mall now?
Yeah. Yes, a piece of junk.
Yeah.
That's right. Good point. That's a good point.
The, you know, area.
And that cemetery is gone forever.
Just have to keep up.
Have to keep up.
Keep up. Stamina.
You want to tell them about the book distribution?
Yes, let's talk about what comes next. We do have some refreshments for everybody. We're a narrow building, and so we could get clogged up when we start this. But Buddy has already signed all of the books that he brought us. But if you would like a personalized signature as well, I want to send Buddy way down to your late slot. That's what it is.
Half a mile that way.
Down in what we call the ladies' library, he will be there at a table. But for those of you who are interested in buying a book today, and just one per family, please, we will be taking your card or your cash or your check. No promissory notes. Actually, right here in the, it's going to be kind of in the gift shop area, but it's going to be kind of close. But we'll try to make it go as quickly as we can.
I know some of you may wanted to get multiple copies, or what we want to do, because this is we only have a certain limited number of books. And so we want to make sure that everybody, each family or individual that's here by themselves gets a copy if they want it. And then anything that's left over, then we can, if you want extra copies, you can do that then after everybody's been served. Also, I'm delivering next week to the local exchange 20 more copies. And this will be pretty much all going to be left. It'll be 20 copies sent to the local exchange. And so people that you get them there. If you don't want to get one now, if you want to think about it for a while or whatever. So we'll be at the local exchange.
And it's 65.
60 copies.
60 or 65. 60, right?
60.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, unless you're charging tax. You charging tax.
We always
All right, here's the deal. You don't have no clue what a deal you're getting here. This book, you know what it lists for on Amazon right now?
pre-order.
Pre-order on Amazon, $163. But this new one now, go in, and you all are getting it for 60. And when these run out, that's don't think no more. It's also get it online after that. So keep that in mind. Strike while the iron's hot. And so you can tell that they are self-published. These are self-published books. I made no money on this book. Please be advised, I don't make a cent on this book. That's my disclaimer. I'm not here to make money. I'm losing money.
Thank you, Buddy.
We have 2 restrooms in the house. In case you have never been here, one is right here, the other is on the floor.